Is the dollar about to crash? Are we moving to a cashless digital currency system that's going to render the dollar worthless? Is the Russian economy and war effort showing cracks? Is China flipping its stance on Ukraine and doubling down on the Taiwan Strait? A lot is happening right now that you will want straight answers about, so let's jump into this. I'll also announce another great giveaway, so definitely stick around for that. The dollar. There's quite a bit of misinformation going viral about digital currency and the de-dollarization of the world. Now, some of it is based on fact, and much of it is just mass media scare tactics to really get clicks and ratings at the expense of your calm and peace. So let's take a look at these frightening headlines and separate the fact from fiction. Now, first of all, there are some misinformed, well-known pundits and commentators out there who are mixing up the terms digital currency and cashless. Now, digital currency is basically a blockchain construct with a ledger that keeps track of who has what tokens and how they transact in them. And most people don't own any digital currency. If you don't understand blockchains, you're probably in good company with most of the world. Now, that alone should be reason enough to question whether some digital currency will suddenly spring up overnight and replace the dollar. Some have digital currency in their portfolios. China experimented with a digital currency based on its yuan, and several national banks are moving to add digital currency to their money. There are two problems with this, though, however. First, you may have seen several high-profile cases where investors have been wiped out or the value of a digital currency evaporated overnight or stolen by hackers. Now, obviously, a central bank has to offer currency the world has to have faith in its use and stability. And that is why many of these digital currency projects are more test cases at this stage. Will they eventually rise to the level of full usage? Yeah, and probably in your lifetime at the rate they're advancing. I can say that with relative certainty because of the other term, cashless. Now, there's this fear of a cashless society, but what people don't tell you is that we're already living in a cashless society in most of the advanced world. We stopped backing our dollars with gold or silver a half a century ago. Most of the dollars out there are imaginary, as they literally do not exist on paper as banknotes of the United States dollars. Let's use an example here. Let's say an employer pays you the same weekly salary of $1,000. That employer pays you with a check or direct deposit from the proceeds and income received from people who wrote checks or used debit or credit cards. Now, you are spending that money earned by writing checks to pay bills or using your debit card at the grocery store. Now, when was the last time that you saw someone pay with a physical check at the grocery store? Though that was once a thing that people kind of did at one time. Now, you may even be spending money that you don't have by using a credit card. And where's the cash in any of those transactions? It's cashless. But don't mix that up with digital currency. Now, allegedly, tucked away in a vault somewhere are all the banknotes of the United States dollars, but even your bank doesn't have that kind of cash on hand. They took your money and loaned it out 10 different ways to other banks. If you were to pull together every single actual paper dollar in existence and held it up to the total that the ledger shows are in use, they probably would not match up. You might see this cashless society differently if you're in your 40s or older. If you ever had a coin jar where you toss your coins at the end of the day, you can see how we have moved to a cashless society today. Maybe you plan to crack open what was really an adult piggy bank to fund your future vacation. Now try giving a kid today an actual piggy bank. They probably won't even know what it's for. But one thing is for sure, you're not ending your day with as many coins in your pocket because you aren't transacting in cash anymore, which would require change. So, when you hear, as some pundits will argue, some national parks don't take cash or some institution or stores don't take cash anymore, it's because most people have a debit card that they're using. Now, these same parks and institutions aren't accepting Bitcoin, a digital currency, either at this time. But technically, they are transacting cashlessly. Now, allegedly, there's an actual dollar with a genuine serial number somewhere supporting that transaction. The other exaggerated false information that you'll often hear is the control aspect. Pundits often claim that central banks can dictate where, how, and if you can spend money. They claim they will know through digital currency how much you spend, on what, and if you can even spend it. Now, the pundits claim that your transactional freedom is at stake. They portray a scary science fiction dystopian future, but it's not very convincing when you really begin to scratch the surface. Back in the old days, they would bite the gold coin to make sure that they actually had a mark on it. Gold is a soft, malleable metal, so you could ensure that it was gold if you could put a tooth mark on it. Now, that simple action is one of the reasons a complete transaction to digital currency isn't likely at a consumer transactional level. It's a value proposition. If I offered you 50 digital tokens or one paper banknote for a loaf of bread, which one would you take? There's also a transactional problem. It's one thing to exchange your dollars at a kiosk for a movie, amusement park ride, video game, or other digital credit at a single establishment. And it's another thing to exchange earned income for digital credits that are not accepted everywhere. For example, have you ever tried to use your Starbucks Star Rewards to buy gas? How about using some Bitcoin to watch a movie? You can't, but honestly, you probably can do something similar someday. You wouldn't even notice it because you may have already been doing it. Have you ever used PayPal, Zelle, Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Venmo to pay a friend? Where was the cash in that? If the dollars supporting these transactions you are making were paper currency printed and held in a vault somewhere, great. More than likely, though, it was a digital transaction where the transactional speed of the dollar was so fast that no single person could even trace that dollar down to hold it in hand. So while you are already digitally transacting in many ways, you are not technically using a digital currency at this point. If you were, though, you wouldn't even know the difference. So all that to say, don't get caught up in the surface arguments about what is a digital currency and what is a cashless society. Right now, you are not transacting in digital currency, though you are transacting digitally. Right now, you are not in a cashless society, even though you may have loads of money in the bank and not a single greenback in your possession. These scary words are meant to panic you, but should you panic? Will we eventually have a digital currency transacted on a blockchain and regulated by a central bank? The answer to that is probably yes, and that's really what you should be concerned about. You should worry about whether your country will develop a reliable digital currency first. Currently, 11 central banks in the world have launched a digital currency. 18 have piloted a digital currency, 32 are in development, 39 are in a research phase, 15 digital currencies have been inactivated after their tests, and even 2 were canceled. Now, eventually, there will be a digital currency that may not be based on the US dollar. Since 1944, the US dollar has been the primary reserve currency used by other countries, but that may change for 2 primary reasons: sanctions and BRICS. Sanctions have made it difficult for Russia to transact in US dollars. Sanctions are more of a speed bump than a full stop. China's yuan has replaced the US dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. And the rupee-ruble trade arrangement is an alternative payment mechanism to settle dues in rupees instead of dollars or euros. In the first 2 months of 2023, Japan purchased $52 million worth of Russian oil at almost $70 per barrel, despite the G7's price cap of $60 and other restrictions. And for other countries like China and India, a shadowy gray fleet of tankers has still managed to transport and sell Russian oil. With all the sanctions against Russia, Europe still imported $186 billion worth of things from Russia. India has imported Russian oil, not by transacting in the US dollar for it, but instead using the United Arab Emirates dirham. The truth is, sanctions are not the hammer they once were. Digital currency is another way to circumvent sanctions. Western banking is done on the SWIFT system, which is the same system that allows oligarchs' funds to be frozen and regulates what transactions can and cannot be conducted from which accounts. Russia first compensated for being locked out of the system by demanding transactions be executed in rubles. Now, Russia is now encouraging transactions to be conducted in Chinese yuan. There's considerable animosity toward the US dollar and its power over a country's affairs. Sanctions have pushed that animosity further and have forced nations to find different ways to transact. And the rise of BRICS is also kind of a scary part for users of the US dollar as a reserve currency. The US's increasing reliance on sanctions and weaponizing access to the dollar have escalated the talk of alternatives. The banking failures in the US renewed questions about its acceptability to destabilizing financial crisis. Now, meanwhile, China's ties with Saudi Arabia have led to speculation of a petro-yuan that displaces a petrodollar. While the dollar is not likely to suffer a global collapse, it may lose its position in the spotlight on the center of the world stage. And that may one day rise to the level where some other unified currency equally matches it as a future BRICS envisions. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are the BRICS nations. Several other countries have expressed interest in joining the economic bloc, including Argentina, Iran, Indonesia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. And to add to all this, a rumor is going viral that Mexico and Japan want to join, but that's simply not true. Both countries are still yoked to the US dollar, but still, they may choose to also transact with BRICS nations just as they transact with the US and Europe. And that doesn't make them members, but it does make them potentially transacting in another currency than the US dollar. BRICS, like all those central banks mentioned that are dabbling in digital currency, is very interested in developing its own digital currency. A new unified BRICS digital currency backed by gold and other commodities such as rare earth elements or land has a ready-made market and would be immediately stronger than the dollar. One Russian official at a BRICS meeting recently argued that the dollar and the euro serve the interests of Washington and London rather than the broader global community, emphasizing that they do not recognize Russia, India, and China as equal counterparts. Vladimir Putin has even said, "We are in favor of using the Chinese yuan for settlements between Russia and other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and China has already tested a digital currency yuan." Now, the first step for BRICS is to transact in currencies other than dollars. The next step of their plan that they clearly outline is a unified digital currency. Now, BRICS is absolutely bad for the status quo of the US dollar as a reserve currency. It's a multipolar world that it creates where sanctions become meaningless, but it's also inevitable. BRICS will become stronger and already challenges what it deems excessive Western influence. The next 11, or N11, are emerging economies comprising South Korea, Mexico, Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines, Turkey, and Vietnam. And while smaller economies compared to US, Europe, or BRICS will look to transact in both systems. Digital currencies are the simplest way for countries to transact, and both polar extremes are racing to develop their own digital currency. One is based on the dollar, euro, and pound-centric countries, and the other will be based on BRICS. Could you imagine if buying $1 million worth of widgets from China required you to load up 39.9 cubic feet of paper currency weighing 2,200 pounds and transporting it to China to exchange at some factory? There's a reason there are digital transactions, even when they are not yet transactions in digital currency. The dollar makes up 60% of the value of all the currencies in the world, but that is rapidly changing. The world's de-dollarization is happening rapidly, but they've been talking about the decline of the US dollar for decades. We are only really now seeing some more rapid declines, even as the value of the dollar increases, because of countries being sanctioned and other countries maneuvering around those sanctions. The dollar has been the major currency of the world, especially since Saudi Arabia and OPEC agreed to price oil in dollars. And that may be changing, however, as OPEC Plus is clearly leaning away from the West and towards BRICS. So long as oil is a driver of economies, expect this to be even more significant contributor to the dollar's decline. There may come a time when OPEC Plus forces transactions to be conducted only in a BRICS-based currency, and that would really be an end game for the US dollar. Putin, Xi, and rich Saudis all know this. Will any of that impact your daily transactions for groceries, gas, food, entertainment, or anything else you spend your daily dollars on? Probably not at the transactional level, but from an economic standpoint, it will. It's going to erode economies dramatically. If you take from one pot, put it in another, you have less in the original pot. And a competing BRICS currency could outpace and out-transact the good old greenback, resulting in the dollar having less value. You would need more of them to buy the same amount of things that you buy today. So to cut through all the fear tactics your favorite TV or internet pundits like to use and summarize the actual facts here, I'm going to use these bullet points. Are we moving to a cashless society? Yes. We've been in that process for several decades now. Are cashless and digital currencies the same? Not really. They share some similarities, but they are totally different. Now, will I be forced to use a currency other than dollars? No. The transactional level of consumers is different than the international level of central banks. Will the US or BRICS develop a digital currency? Yes. And the first one that does will have a strong hand in world affairs. Will my transactions be tracked? Sure, maybe. They already are if you're carrying a smartphone revealing your location or you're using a debit card. Now, can my currency in the future be canceled? Getting anyone to use a currency that could be canceled would be tricky, so such a currency is not likely to be widely adopted. Digital currency that has been canceled to date was only used in test cases for an intended limited duration. Could my account be drained if it were digital? Yeah. Did you check your bank account this morning? Are you sure your bank didn't collapse or hackers take your money today? Should I buy precious metals? If it makes you feel more secure, sure. Precious metals have a transaction problem though. Try and use a Morgan dollar to buy a loaf of bread. It's worth only $1 to the store, not the $40 or more it's valued at, or its value simply in the weight of its silver content. Now, will the US dollar be replaced as a leading currency around the world? Absolutely, yes. At some point, it will lose its place on the world stage. And we see this more vividly every day. It will at least compete with another unified, perhaps digital currency. Even Federal Chair Jerome Powell confesses that a future world with more than one reserve currency is a distinct possibility. It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case. The US is still seen as a much more secure economy to invest in than any autocratic nation like China or Russia. So don't expect the dollar to recede from its status as an investment powerhouse anytime soon. The Chinese economy is artificially propped up and heavily burdened with debt. And they also peg the value of their currency artificially. And that doesn't instill much confidence in global investors. As for Russia, if I had money, putting it into rubles that Putin could seize without cause really seems a bit risky to say the least. And furthermore, the way OPEC exploits and wields its power answering to no one, investors aren't likely to put too much into the United Arab Emirates dirham. And for now, US dollars and the US economy are still the most stable investments out there at this time. They are the most secure places for your money as long as you aren't invading other countries, waging war on your own people, or supporting and buying from countries that do these things. And look, I'll be honest with you when others won't. If you have followed this channel for any length of time, you know we spell out the real threats for you when others just try and whip you into a frenzy or panic. There's a lot at stake here and much to follow, but there's not a reason to panic. Anyone trying to panic you, who may have also wanted you to get into a panic about the diesel shortage that we debunked last year, you might want to consider tuning them out at this point. They're doing a poor job of keeping you informed. We don't claim to be financial advisors and we don't give financial advice on this channel, but I will tell you the real future worry here is a BRICS digital currency and not the digital currency itself. Is the US dollar receding from the world stage? Yes, but as Chairman Jerome Powell put it, I don't think it's something that you would ever feel right away. Over time, they would have to create an economic ecosystem whereby another currency becomes a better currency for them to use. What we can do is we can make the dollar the most attractive currency by continuing to have the rule of law and opening capital accounts and making it an attractive place for people to invest and to use in their businesses. There wouldn't be any short-term effect of that over time, though. I suppose it would diminish our status as a reserve currency. That about sums it up. The dollar has to become attractive again and less punitive. Have you heard anyone proclaiming the dollar is about to die, the government will control you or your digital currency, or another scary story? Let us know your thoughts about this in the comment section below. World economy. Now, it does make sense to follow that extensive clarification about digital currencies and the US dollar as a reserve currency for the world with a look at the world economy. There's no denying that the competition for reserve currency status is happening. There's no denying that the recent bank failures and problems are tied to the US raising interest rates so aggressively and quickly. It puts several banks in a position where they could not transition fast enough to meet their debt and payment obligations. And it forced some banks to have to beg for funds elsewhere to make ends meet. And that caused a lot of faith in those financial institutions and a run on withdrawals. That forced the Fed to step in, or governments around the world to step in and promise bank creditors solvency. It's a massive rippling wave traveling through the world's financial sector. And even as world stocks rise, financial shares have plummeted and confidence in financial institutions is shaken. Even the most favorable forecasts predict a recession in the United States. Some would argue that we're already in one, despite not all of the indicators being technically in place. There's never been an aggressive fight against inflation that a rapid economic slowdown has not accompanied. So let's assume a recession is inevitable for the United States. So then too, it is probably for many nations worldwide. A record number of developing countries are at risk of a debt crisis. Ballooning inflation, escalating borrowing costs, and a strong dollar have made repaying loans and raising money significantly more expensive for dozens of developing nations, pushing several into default last year. And if your country isn't suffering from high inflation amidst a recession or experiencing a slowdown, it will this year and next. In the coming years, and I say that because I don't think we will see any attractive sectors of any economies for a couple of years, we can expect governments to push for price controls to combat greedflation and price gouging. You can expect some form of price regulation on basic necessities. Also, we are beginning to see the labor market respond to tighter financial conditions and insecurity about the future. You can expect manufacturing to slow worldwide in most sectors except for the defense industries. Tech stocks have dominated stock market gains so far in 2023. 7 mega cap US tech stocks have contributed 92% of stock market gains this year. At the same time, layoffs are up nearly fivefold so far this year, with tech companies leading the way. The job market is the next significant indicator about to spit out some pretty terrible numbers for the foreseeable future. So you may see stocks still going higher for a while longer, which would appear to indicate global economic strength and resilience, but don't expect that to hold out for too much longer. The truth is the global economy is showing every kind of indication that it is struggling and will continue to struggle into the near future. And that's going to be dangerous for some developing countries and challenging for others. Barring the collapse of one of these competing forces, renewed confidence in the banking system, and the war ending in Ukraine, we're looking at a deep global recession. If you haven't already downloaded our free recession guide to better prep against this inevitable downturn, you might want to do that now before we are in the worst of the storm coming. I'll put a link to this free guide in the description section below. So what do you think? How bad will this recession get? Or do you even believe we're in a recession? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. China. It's increasingly harder and harder to understand China's exact position on anything until you accept that they are solely interested in their own economic growth. The same could probably be said for most countries, I suppose. In the recent confusion, we're going to put in the category of lost in translation. The Chinese ambassador to the EU has stressed that Beijing does not recognize Russia's annexation of the Ukrainian territories. Now, at the same time, China does not condemn the annexation either. The same ambassador confessed to the UN that the no-limit friendship touted by Putin after his meeting with Xi last month was nothing but rhetoric. Now, the Russian ambassador responded to China's backpedaling by saying that the Kremlin was focused on the content and spirit of the contacts that took place between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in Moscow. Now, clearly, China is struggling to remain neutral while profiting. Macron of France has now met with Xi and pleaded with him to follow through and reach out to Ukrainian President Zelensky. And such a call would be difficult for Moscow to stomach, and it would be challenging for China to support Moscow while also trying to appear neutral in the conflict. A French diplomatic source said Macron had urged Xi not to provide weapons to Russia and that Xi had replied that it was not his war. Xi also indicated that China was ready to work together with France on obtaining a negotiated end to the fighting. Now, in a more significant escalation between the United States and China, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with the Taiwanese president in California on Wednesday, despite warnings from Beijing that the meeting would provoke severe confrontation with the United States. Now, China views any gesture that seems to treat Taiwan as an independent country as an insult. Now, the last time when a Speaker of the House met with leaders from Taiwan, China conducted multiple live missiles and military drills in the Taiwan Strait. And we can now expect at least that response, if not a further escalation. China's diplomat at China's embassy in Washington warned last week that the meeting could lead to serious confrontation, adding, "Those who play with fire will perish by it." Now on cue, China has announced it will begin boarding and inspecting ships in the Taiwan Strait. And the U.S. and Taiwan consider the Taiwan Strait to be international waters. China, of course, views this area as Chinese territory and fully within its right to forcefully board and inspect ships. We're on the cusp of a much greater conflict about to happen here, and we're going to continue to monitor this as it unfolds. What do you think? Is China simply in this for the biggest profit? Are we about to see a new front open up in a global war? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Giveaway. For this week's giveaway, we're going to be giving away another wool blanket. To be eligible for a chance to win in this giveaway, just simply post a comment below and click the like button. Next week, I'll use a tool to draw a winner from the comments on this video randomly. Now, for this last video's winner of the survival seeds, the winner is a subscriber to Coda Knight. I'll reach out to you shortly to get that sent to you. Russia, Finland, Ukraine. Finland's entry into NATO means that NATO just gained hundreds of tanks, 62 fighter jets, 700 howitzer, lots of artillery, and 280,000 military personnel. That's an enormous growth for NATO that will cause Putin nightmares for the foreseeable future. Finland's proximity to Russia and history of conflict with Russia is going to force Putin to prove he's not losing this battle. Because of Russian aggression, Finland is now a part of NATO, so it's harder for Putin to justify to his people that invading Ukraine has made Russia stronger against Western aggression. Finland also announced that it would acquire the U.S.-Israeli-made David Sling long-range air defense systems for $345 million, just a day after it became the newest member of NATO. Now, the weapon system has been designed to intercept or counter long-range rockets, relatively slow-flying cruise missiles at ranges between 25 miles to 180 miles. Such a system would remove the threat of most of Russia's missile arsenal and provide Europe with protection against Russian missile aggression. As for the war in Ukraine, the head of Russia's private Wagner militia said on Thursday that Ukrainian forces were were not abandoning the city of Bakhmut, but that, even if they did, he would need more support from the regular military before trying to advance further. Neither side is really making significant headway in this conflict, though a Ukrainian counteroffensive is still anticipated. At least one Russian defector, who was part of Putin's secretive elite personal security service, has indicated that the Russian president is becoming more isolated and paranoid by the day. Now, I don't put too much faith in the stories like this, so I wouldn't give it too much time here. But one thing is for sure, the Russian economy might not be propped up artificially for too much longer. The Russian ruble just fell to its lowest level over last year. Western sanctions, declining revenues from energy sales, and high military spending continue to put the pressure on the Russian currency. Also, Cisco Systems has left the Russian market, destroying tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment and components in the process. Now, Cisco Systems decided to physically destroy spare parts, product demonstrations, equipment, and even furniture on their exit from Russia and Belarus after already dropping their workforce by a factor of 12. They have also terminated all existing contracts. Russia will have difficulty finding an equivalent tech company to replace Cisco. All of these things point to cracks in the Russian economy and its ability to sell an increasingly unpopular war to its people, which it still deems a special military operation. It will either force Putin to exert a massive show of force to try and convince his people and the world that he's still in charge, or Russia will be forced to soften its efforts and perhaps give up on Ukraine. What do you think? How will Putin respond to all this bad news? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. As I look at all this news as neutrally as possible, it's something I try to do every day. I just try to pull the facts and try to present it and give you the information and let you do what you will. I also have to acknowledge a few certainties. This global conflict is escalating. The US dollar is going to be at least challenged in the coming years, and some form of digital currency will one day exist. And the countries that control that the most will hold sway in politics. Now, we're heading into an undeniable global recession in the next few years. And I think all of that is apparent on the surface. I also don't believe the whole world is about to collapse, as some would have you believe. Look, the reasons to prep outweigh the reasons not to. Whatever chaos the world descends into doesn't mean that you have to be a part of that, wholly exposed to it. The preps that you put in place today insulate you a little more with each one against the chaos and upheavals of supply chains and trade deals, an infrastructure that will continue to fail in ever more dramatic ways. Be warned though, prepping now, it's easy compared to prepping in the future, so I hope you take advantage of what you can do today. Again, if you have any thoughts, any feedback, feel free to post that below, and as always, stay safe out there.